Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Wednesday, December 1st. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The game against Michigan in just 360 days. The penultimate version of the college football playoff rankings are out. And as you'd probably guess, the Buckeyes on the outside looking in at the moment. But with this season being as crazy as it has been, is it totally impossible for them to sneak back into the field? Here to discuss that and the most likely spots for Ohio State to end up in a bowl game is Buckeye Scoop's Tony Gerdeman. Tony, before we get started, let's just address the comment that 5,000 people are going to leave on YouTube or Twitter when they see the title of this episode and before they actually listen to it. Tony, didn't you see the Michigan game? Ohio State doesn't deserve to be in the playoff this year.
Well, and the thing about that is you need four teams for a four-team playoff. So you can't have Georgia play themselves four times. You've got to have other teams in there. So, yes, other teams have lost. I believe there are going to be teams with losses in the playoffs and possibly even teams with two losses in the playoffs, possibly even teams that have lost to a rival this season, possibly even teams that have given up some rushing yards this season. Somebody has to play in the playoffs. It might as well be your team.
You go through the this has been the argument all season. Well, they're not a top five team. It's like, well, name the five teams that are ahead of them, because here's the thing. There might only be like one good team this year. Like, that's starting to look like a real strong possibility. And you go through that team schedule, it's like, well, who have they actually played? Are we sure they're even as good as we think they are? Because we may find out. So let's run through real quick the top 10 of this week's college football playoff rankings. Number 1, Georgia. Number 2, Michigan. Number 3, Alabama. Number 4, Cincinnati. They're the top 4. Of course, Georgia and Alabama will play, so that may not be the top 4 next week. Oklahoma State is 5. Notre Dame 6. The Buckeyes 7th. Ole Miss 8th. Baylor 9th. Oregon 10th. So if you have chalk this weekend, Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State all winning, Tony, it seems to me like that's probably your most likely playoff field as of right now.
Yeah, and I don't know how you could argue that. You've got 4 conference champions of the 4 major conferences right now. So yeah, there's no really, like, you're not going to see Notre Dame jump there, number 6. Like, they're not going to do anything to move up. And you look behind that, there's nobody else that can get into that if this happens. This is I guess we would call it the worst case scenario for Buckeye fans. And it may also be the most likely because everybody we're talking about, as you said, chalk, they're the favorites. This is the most likely scenario. And so, yeah, that would be nice and easy for the committee, and, boom, done.
Okay, so that's the boom, done, easy peasy chalk scenario. What about this season has been easy peasy chalk scenario at any point? I would submit basically nothing. So here's the chaos scenario. Georgia and Michigan both win because those are 2 teams Ohio State is functionally not going to jump. So Georgia and Michigan both win, they're in, okay? Baylor beats Oklahoma State. Houston beats Cincinnati. Utah beats Oregon, just for good measure, just so there's not the head-to-head conversation there. So then it's Georgia 1, Michigan 2, and then question mark, some combination of Notre Dame, Ohio State, maybe Ole Miss, presumably Baylor, because you would think it would be hard for Ohio, it would be hard to leave out a conference champion Baylor, even with 2 losses in that scenario. So some combination of Notre Dame, Ohio State, maybe Ole Miss, Baylor. It would be hard. Can Ohio State jump Notre Dame? I guess is the first question, because it seems like a decent chance Baylor jumps Ohio State.
I think you need to include Alabama and still in the mix there with the loss to Georgia, depending on how that loss is, because we've seen Ohio State not necessarily get the benefit of the doubt against some SEC teams in rankings in past years. This year, I don't know how much Ohio State has done to earn any benefit of the doubt. But if Georgia wins comfortably enough, I think then you move Alabama out and maybe then you could start to talk about Ohio State. I think Baylor, if they beat Oklahoma State, probably jumps Ohio State with the conference championship. And then ultimately, it comes down to a committee maybe choosing a 1-loss, no coach Notre Dame team against a 2-loss, 1-coach Ohio State team. And in my experience, they'd rather choose a team with a coach. Like, we know Ohio State and Notre Dame are close right now. They're 6 and 7, so they are being talked about. They do have a common opponent in Purdue. Purdue probably being Notre Dame's best win this season. Notre Dame beat Purdue by 14. Ohio State beat Purdue by 28. Ohio State also has a 7-touchdown win over the number 11 team in the nation. So are those two data points, do those trump what Notre Dame has done with one fewer loss and one fewer coach? Does it then make them dead even? And then you just have to decide who's better, game control, all of that stuff. And the thing about it, like the committee can weigh an absent coach or an absent player as much as they want, just like a conference title, an extra win, a loss. They can put as much value as they want on it. And I don't know how you don't put a ton of weight to not having your head coach there.
Well, was there any indication from Gary Bart on Tuesday night whether they had reached these rankings before or after the Brian Kelly news broke? Because, it would seem like it would be hard to, if they had already incorporated that into their rankings, to then jump Ohio State. But if that happened afterwards, I mean, frankly, I think you look at the resumes and Ohio State having a 49-point win over a ranked team and Notre Dame having 0 ranked wins this year, it seems like, are you sure you got them in the right order? But even setting that aside, if they've already baked in the Brian Kelly thing, that makes it kind of a different conversation. Was there any indication from Barta whether that had already been factored into this week's rankings?
Where they get to at that point is it wasn't factored in from my understanding yet. It'll get factored in now. Okay. Now, once they get to after the championship games and the final rankings, that's when you can begin to project. And that's kind of what the committee also does. They don't project until the end, and there's not as much it's not necessarily projection per se, but they will take into account players who are absent, coaches who are not there. And at that point, you kind of do have to project like who would be better. And that's what they do with the final rankings. Who would be better? Who would serve the playoffs better by being in there? And so they have not projected yet. They will begin to. And so, yeah, it's not been taken into account yet, but now, and one of the questions they were asked is like, well, why are you waiting to take this into account? Because he's not there. So, and that Notre Dame is no longer playing any games. And the answer is basically, well, we just don't. And so there's still going to be some movement there. I wouldn't be surprised to see Notre Dame actually drop a couple of spots just based on, because again, I think it's a very weighty thing to not have your head coach and for your head coach to be like, see ya. Like what is Brian Kelly saying about Notre Dame, and what is the committee hearing?
Yeah, Brian Kelly, who would presumably know Notre Dame better than anyone else, very clearly does not feel he can win a national championship in Notre Dame this year. So that does seem like the committee loves to talk about data points. That does seem like a data point, but yeah, I do like the why. Well, because if you have ever argued with a 3-year-old, it's basically like you've been on the conference call with the college football playoff committee. So now you can cross that off your bucket list. So let's assume some kind of sanity holds this weekend, and there's not the whole series of upsets that Ohio State would need to get into the playoff. So you get 2 scenarios then. If Michigan wins, Ohio State probably headed to the Rose Bowl, almost certainly headed to the Rose Bowl to play the winner of Utah and Oregon. Here is the line from the Rose Bowl's own website explaining the process. Quote, should a team from the Big Ten or Pac-12 be selected to play in the college football playoff, in this case, this would be Michigan, the Tournament of Roses will traditionally select the next highest CFP-ranked team from that conference. Ohio State is ranked 7th. The next highest ranked team is 11th, and they beat that team by 49 points a couple weeks ago. So that seems like that would be a hard sell for the committee, for the Tournament of Roses committee. So if Michigan wins and some kind of sanity holds this weekend, almost certainly the Rose Bowl for Ohio State. If Iowa wins, they're obviously not in the playoff. They're 13th this week. They're not jumping up to 4, even with a win over Michigan. So they would then go to the Rose Bowl if Iowa wins. So if Michigan wins and goes to the playoff, next highest Big Ten team would be Ohio State. They would go instead to the Rose Bowl. Tony, I mean, that, I know Ohio State fans are not in a great place mentally or, psyche-wise right now, but that Rose Bowl is always an incredible trip. It is my favorite bowl trip that we ever get to go on. And, that would be a couple of very interesting possible matchups depending on who wins the Pac-12.
Yeah, you've got a a rematch with Oregon after getting beaten up by the Ducks, a possible rematch with Oregon where Ohio State can show how far they've come, also answer some of the questions that came back from the loss to Michigan and say, no, we are better, we are stronger, we are tougher than people are saying. Or you get a Utah team that is tough as heck, and you're going to have to prove it anyway. So the Ohio State team that we saw against Oregon and against Michigan is going to have to be a different Ohio State team that we see in the Rose Bowl, if we do see them in the Rose Bowl, because there's no easy out there. And I wonder. I assume Ohio State would rather see Oregon, but would you want something completely new, something completely different, something you haven't done before? And if the answer is yes, is the answer really you want to play Utah? In terms of the players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And both of those are very big physical teams, which, after Ohio State got challenged by Michigan, and you heard some of the things from Michigan's coaching staff afterwards, be interesting to see how Ohio State responded to either of those two. My theory has always been you look at the bottom of the playoff rankings to see what the College Football Playoff Committee does. I had not scrolled down to the bottom until just now. 22 Arkansas, 23 Kentucky, 25 Texas A&M. So Tony, it seems like they're setting up for, if it is an extremely close Georgia-Alabama game, boy, the Tide has so many ranked wins. Yes, they're all 22, 25, but man, they have so many ranked wins. Tony, how could you leave them out? We don't need to get into that. We'll see. We'll see how this SEC championship game plays out, but just bookmark that. That is one of my pet theories. Look at the bottom of the rankings. That tells you what they want to do. I have a feeling I know what they want to do. So okay, Tony, Iowa wins the Big Ten championship game. Michigan's out. Ohio State fans are filled with glee and mirth and laughing. So at that point, where does Ohio State go? The Orange Bowl and the Cotton Bowl are both college football playoff games. So those are out. The Rose Bowl is presumably out then, because Iowa would be in the Rose Bowl as the Big Ten champion. So it cannot be the Sugar Bowl, because that is the SEC versus the Big 12. So Ohio State will either go to the Peach Bowl for the first time ever, or the Fiesta Bowl for the 473rd time ever. Is there a potential matchup, a potential bowl destination, between those two options? Because there's not a tie-in at that point. It's just kind of like dealer's choice. Is there a destination? Is there a potential matchup that you would really like to see, or that you would really just kind of go, ugh, why?
Tom, I've just been thinking about this over the past about 2 minutes because I knew where this was going. How about in Atlanta, in the Peach Bowl, Ohio State versus Michigan?
I mean, that would be pretty interesting. A little sacrilegious, I think. Boy, I have a feeling we'd have stuff to talk about and write about and podcast about for the next few weeks. I mean, I don't think they can do that, and I don't think they would do that. It feels like that would very much be, boy, let's get old Notre Dame and Michigan back together to renew the old rivalry. Like, that feels very much like that, where that would be headed. And you figure it's, Big 12 champion versus, Big 12 champion or Big 12 runner-up versus Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, probably. So then it's what, Ole Miss in the Peach Bowl? I mean,
yeah.
Ohio State and Ole Miss have never played. There's one of very few Power 5 teams that Ohio State has never played. They've actually never played a team from the state of Mississippi, which is one of those historical oddities.
Take the over.
They've bet the over. That would be kind of interesting, though, because we've never seen Ohio State play Ole Miss. We've never seen Ohio State in the Peach Bowl before. That is the only of the New Year's Six bowls that Ohio State has never played in. I mean, it's nice. It's drivable. It's new. It's interesting. We'll see how the Ohio State pass defense holds up against Ole Miss, but would Matt Corral play in that game? That's kind of an interesting question. But yeah, that's I think I would sign up for covering Lane Kiffin and a team they've never played in a bowl they've never played in.
It's either that, Tom, or Ohio State Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl for, I don't know, of those 500 previous Fiesta Bowls, I believe 235 of them have been against Notre Dame. Like, who else? BYU? Does that do anything for you?
No.
Baylor?
Not really.
No.
It seems like the Big 12 champion is going to be Notre Dame's probably going ahead of, the Big 12 champion is playing in the Sugar Bowl. I don't know that I feel like the Big 12 is getting 2 New Year's Six teams this year. I mean, not ahead of Ohio State, not ahead of Notre Dame.
No,
probably not ahead of Ole Miss. BYU's not getting in. It feels very much like it's going to be Notre Dame. Notre Dame. If Iowa wins, then it's probably Notre Dame, Michigan in the Fiesta, and Ohio State, Ole Miss in the Peach. Does that sound right?
I think that's about what makes the most sense looking at the other possible options. And really, you're not going to bump Oklahoma up without a coach. I mean, no reason to do that. Do you want a 3-loss Oregon in there? I mean, that seems like they're a Holiday Bowl team at that point, somewhere in there. I mean, that seems like the most logical, Tom. But it's 2021. It's 2021 college football season. We have just laid out the chalk for all of it. The most logical, the most likely, which means what percentage of what we've just explained is going to happen? Is it 80% tops? I mean, I have no idea.
I think I'm not completely, totally ready to rule out Ohio State versus Michigan in the Cotton Bowl and the college football playoff semifinals. Like, I think it's very unlikely, but this year, man, like I have had more than one game that I have completely gone, well, I'm not watching that. That's a huge waste. How did they win? What? What? So yeah, this is for a season which is almost over. It's like, boy, there's still a lot of possibilities there. So yes, Peach Bowl, Fiesta Bowl, Rose Bowl, or somehow maybe the college football playoff. Still all basically the Sugar Bowl is the only New Year's Six bowl that we can confidently tell you Ohio State will not be playing in. Everything else is at least still a little bit alive as we head into the final week of the season. We will have they will find out for sure where they are headed on Sunday afternoon. We will probably do some sort of a live show when that happens to break down all of the matchups, all of the interesting stuff that is coming. And then on to bowl coverage, on to signing day. There will probably be some coaching carousel news that will touch on Ohio State in some way at some point this month. There's going to be an awful lot going on. So make sure you subscribe to all of our great podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, wherever you find this podcast. You can find all of our great podcasts. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. And make sure you check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Subscribe right there. Every time we do a live show, you will get notified. So you will be able to participate in those. We do lots of live Q&A shows, pregame shows, postgame shows before the bowl games, all that good stuff. All at youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.